Good evening. Welcome to the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting for April 26th, 7:05 p.m. Tonight we'll continue the public hearing for the Enclave. We will be discussing the traffic, and we'll also be looking at a new amended plan of the site itself. John, would you like to introduce the Placido team?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, other members of the board. For the record, John Smolak, attorney for the applicant, Norfolk Holding. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce you to several members of our project team. First, we have Sam Mermelstein of Norfolk Holding, our project owner's representative. Also here is Thomas DePlacido Jr. of DePlacido Development Corporation, our project manager. Also with us is Matt Merver of Bowler Engineering, our project engineer firm. And lastly, William Scully, Green International Affiliates, our project traffic engineer. This evening, we've handed out a proposed form of agenda to structure tonight's discussion. And what I'd like to do first is to touch upon and summarize some of the issues that I had raised, actually that were raised at the last hearing, and concerning certain title matters and matters related to the age restriction that's being proposed for this project. And then that discussion will be followed by a discussion by Tom DePlacido, who will update you on some of the changes and major adjustments that have been made as a result of input from the neighborhood. And thereafter, what we'll have is a walkthrough by Matt Merva of some of the adjustments or the details of some of the plan changes that have been made since the last hearing. And then lastly, William Scully will run you through the traffic report, which we didn't have the opportunity to discuss at the last meeting, so Bill will follow up with that review of the traffic report. So that said, proceed as follows.
Dan, do you have any comments before we proceed? Okay, go ahead, John.
Okay, well, just a couple of items too. In addition to the letter that the board received from me that was dated April 24th, you should have in your materials Bowler Engineering's April 24th letter responding to Tetra Tech's February 28th peer review letter, as well as Tetra Tech's follow-up April 25th letter. There's also an April 13th letter from the environmental partners to the Norfolk Department of Public Works confirming adequacy of water supply. And I believe that's it. There was a beta group letter that was back dated, I think, February 28th on traffic. It was an initial traffic comment letter as well that has been provided to the board. So, with that said, there are about 5 issues I wanted to touch upon that were in my April 24th letter. I assume the board has received a copy of that letter with attachments, but just quickly, some of the questions that were raised by the board at the last meeting included a question about the proposed 55+ age restriction. Will the project be able to exclude children from the project? And the answer is yes. The applicant is proposing an age-restricted project that would need to comply with the Federal Housing for Older Persons Act, which is called HOPA, as well as the state anti-discrimination law, each of which have an exclusion that allows one to, quote, discriminate on the basis of age, because this is an age-restricted community. There is no limitation, though, on prohibition of or an exclusion of children under the age of 18. And in fact, many larger developers have undertaken those sort of exclusions of children in other age-restricted projects. I will note that the Department of Housing and Community Development issued a policy back in February, which is applicable only to local initiative program or LIP projects or local action units that are governed by DHCD. That basically states that they, as a policy, DHCD doesn't allow the exclusion of children, but that only relates to those DHCD programs. It does not relate to the mass housing programs. And that was confirmed in discussions I've had with the fair housing attorney at DHCD, and also confirmed with Mass Housing. Mass Housing has not chosen to employ that policy and make it applicable here. So in other words, that exclusion is allowed. It doesn't affect the inclusion of the affordable units in the state subsidized housing inventory. So a second question was related to septic system design flow under Title V. The question was, if one cannot restrict children under the age of 18 from a 55 project, does the project really qualify for the design flow of 150 gallons per day? And I think since my first response to the answer to the first question was in the affirmative, it makes this question moot. But suffice to say that the Title V regulations do provide for a design flow of 150 gallons per day based on a 2-bedroom unit. The Title V regulations allow for a different calculation if you have 1-bedroom units or any units that are designed to include more than 2 bedrooms. But the applicant has committed to proposing age-restricted units that would be all 2-bedroom units. So therefore, we would comply with the design flow requirement of Title V.
Does the Board of Health have a more stringent requirement for design flow?
I haven't seen a more stringent requirement. We can really
Okay.
confirm with that, and if necessary, make adjustments, but that's my understanding of the more stringent requirement. The third item is question about the so-called paper street that was located between 10 and 12 Village Green. There, from Tetra Tech's comments, there was an existing right-of-way that was located between the two lots that would lead from Village Green to the project site. And if we could pull it up here, I think it's in this location right here. There's it's actually to the right. This, that's between 10 and 12. Yeah, between 10 and 12. And so, so the question was whether there is a viable access or a lawful access from Village Green Street between lots 10 and 12 to the project site. And the answer is no. The subdivision was originally created in 1960. It did identify this area on a plan, but plans which identify a right-of-way without any further easement rights does not create an easement of access that would allow for access into this project site. In addition, the owners of both 10 and 12 Village Green, in their deed descriptions, their description of the property is bound by a way. So what that means is that that would invoke what's called the state derelict fee statute, which basically states, and I'm sure many of you have heard this before, that basically if you have a deed description of your property that is bound by a way, then the landowner would own to the center line of the roadway, unless there's a contrary intent shown. In the title information we've reviewed, we have not seen any reservation of other rights, either the original owner or others that would change that notion of the derelict fee statute in this particular access point. But there is no right from this right-of-way into the project site. And although the derelict fee statute does allow for access and ownership between lots 10 and 12, in this case law that basically states that if you own land that is at the end of the right-of-way, that does not mean that the property abuts. So it's pretty clear, black letter law, that there is no right of access at that point. So for all those reasons, we did not identify any viable right of access at that point.
John, can I ask you a question on that?
Sure.
Is Village Green Street a public way?
I believe it is, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's been, so Village Green Street was accepted by the town?
Right, but there's no evidence that that little stub.
That stub wasn't part of the, was there a taking, or was there, do you have the documents that show when the town acquired that road?
I don't have the town meeting documents in that regard, but we could try, I think the last time they researched, there was an ability to find those records, but we could certainly dig a little more closely.
But how do you know the stub wasn't part of the taking for the Village Green Street?
Because the research that was done in the past would indicate that there was a taking, we couldn't find any information.
Okay.
We'll talk to the surveyors and see if they have any further information to document. the actual acceptance by town meeting.
And you know for a fact that that subdivision developer that built out this road did not reserve the fee in that stub?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So that's what we have on that particular matter, in terms of access. Another matter that was raised, actually by the owner of 18 Village Green in this location,
Oh, I'm sorry, you want to go back to that? Okay.
there was a question of whether that owner had rights in the proposed Road A. And we performed a 50-year title search and could not locate any rights of that owner onto this particular roadway access A. There was something in the title which provided a reservation of a 20-foot wide easement right-of-way within that lot, but it was for the benefit of the owner of the property right here. So there was no access right or right-of-way benefit that was granted or conveyed to this owner into that roadway A location. And so we could provide certainly additional documentation if need be. And lastly, in terms of, there was a question in terms of any licensing requirements for the LP tanks, so LPG underground or tanks. And back in February, there was a memo from Chief Bushnell, which basically suggested that if you have an above-ground tank of 10,000 gallons, it would require licensing. Our intent is to install a series of 1,000-gallon underground tanks. Those would require a license under Chapter 148, but would require a permit. So a permit would be pulled for each tank as the units are being developed in the property.
I have a question. Would that be one tank per building or one tank per unit?
Joe, what we'd be proposing, Thomas DePlacido, for the record, what we'd be proposing is probably one underground tank per building, so you'd have that would cover either 2 or 4 units.
So that's the conclusion of my comments. Haven't taken any questions, otherwise we could have Tom take the next step.
Any questions from the board on the memo?
Mr. Chair, if I could
Yes.
just elaborate a little bit on the access points. I did look at the title briefly this afternoon. The main access point to this, the only access point to the project is a strip of land that was carved off of 16 Village Green Street. So 16 Village Green Street used to include that piece. That was carved off back in 2012 or 14, somewhere a few years ago. It wasn't recently. And there may be some question of whether or not, in doing so, that took away the required minimum lot size for that property. So that's something we need to check. But in speaking to Mr. Smolak, if that did result in a nonconformity for 16, the project site would have enough land that they could deed back to 16 some land to bring that lot back up to a conforming status. So that's just something to check into, because if that were the case, it might affect the layout or the design of the project site. If this is an R1 zoning district, the minimum lot size, I believe, is 30,000 square feet. So that's just a question. I'm not sure what zoning district we're in, and unless you guys know offhand. Which zoning district this property's in?
It was like a 30,000 square foot lot.
Is it? Okay. So if it's 30,000, that lot, I think, has 30,000. That's not an issue. But if it's a different, no, shaking her head back there.
I'm at 16 Village Green, it's a little bit under 30, and I've spoken about that with Tom, and I think he's aware of that.
Oh, it's under 30.
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. So we need to review that issue and.
I'll pull up the plans on that if I could, because we actually could find a strip of land that's on the plan that's proposed in the original submission to the board, that actually has a strip on it that we'd be deeding back to them. So as the Board of Appeals approves this, we could actually have a Form A plan with the planning board that would actually, then we could deed that strip back to them, or a strip back to them.
Okay. And
It's on the plans.
are you? Is this a cooperative thing with the owner of 16?
We have been in discussions with them, yes.
Okay.
We could just make it as a
So
condition, correct?
we're gonna, yeah, I'll follow up on that and
Yeah.
report back.
Is that the only,
That's all I had to.
okay.
Oh, I just, on the age restriction thing, I'll confirm that. I mean, what John has said is generally correct, and I don't doubt that it's not correct. I just want to make sure that we've covered all our bases. If for some reason this project can't restrict children, then the board should know that, and that should be part of our deliberations. So I'll look into that before the next meeting.
Okay.
So you're going to do a peer review on that, Dan?
Exactly.
John, go ahead. You're back up. Tom, you may want to make sure you take a microphone as well.
I'd like to spend a few minutes actually just talking about everything that's on this project update page here with us. That's on the PowerPoint. For the record, my name is Thomas DeBlasio. I'm actually working with Norfolk Holdings on this as a project manager to develop the project. So I'm instead of going through these things and then going to the plan, I'm actually just going to go to the plan and then actually tell you what we're talking about. But you could actually refer back to this PowerPoint if you needed to, things at a further time. But I think it makes a little bit more sense to talk about the revised plan and mention these bullet points. Screens. Basically, I'd like to give a short overview of the revised plan. While it may look, yep, right there. While it may look very similar to what we have seen before, the plan before, actually what we did here is really we've been working with the neighbors on 12, 14, and 16 to try to really address some of their concerns. And actually, they've spent a lot of time meeting with me. I've actually been in 12 Village Greens home. I have a sunroom out of the back. We tried to accommodate a lot of their views, work with them on that. With 16 over here, listen to some of their concerns, and really work with them. And I thank them very much for actually meeting with me and spending the time, because it helped me to understand what their concerns were and actually to help incorporate some new ideas into the plan with that. One of the overall things that came up right away was the building height. So what we tried to do here along this northern boundary is keep it as a single story as ranches. At one point in time, actually the whole project was ranches, and what that did is create a bigger footprint all the way around. So what we did was, well, we wanted to maintain ranches here because we could keep the profile of the home lower and less visible from the neighbors over in here than as having a two-story dwelling. We kept those as ranches, but we actually we introduced a two-story home over here with a master bedroom on the first floor, which actually had a smaller footprint, which actually allowed us to widen these units out to create more space in between and help with the neighbors here as providing a buffer between the units as they're looking from the back of their houses. So what we were doing, the first thing that we looked at is building height, and then actually the backyards. And as you see here, we have here, this is a two-unit building, and what we did is we surrounded it with evergreens like this. And actually, so it's created a buffer. So if somebody in this house here, you have a nice buffer. So it's single story. We have evergreens that'll grow to a nice height. Create a buffer with that. We maintain the rear yard setbacks. So basically, the setbacks that are along this edge are 25 feet, which are the same that are in the underlying zone. We didn't encroach on that anymore with everything. We held that in there. And then what we did is we actually kept a greater distance between the buildings. And we were able to do that because we actually went to the two-story units, and we were able to have a smaller footprint and cluster those down here a little bit more. So we actually eliminated 2 buildings in this area. And then looking, like I said, from where this sunroom is here and this house here, we tried to create a green corridor. So if somebody's here, they actually can look through. We have the trees here, and actually, when they look out the back, they're not looking directly at a house. They've got a green corridor. Same thing here, a nice green corridor coming down, and even over here as well. And then what we did, and Matt will talk about this a little bit more, is we relocated some of the houses that were in here and created a green space. Matt will go into that with a little bit more detail, so I don't want to elaborate more on that. So we had the greatest separation with the houses. Then we looked at lighting. That was another concern for the neighbors in this area. And what we said was, you see these little carve-outs here? This plan actually is specifically set up for the way that these lots actually work here, is that we could put a deck in that little carve-out. And then we put a floodlight for the deck, a lighting for the deck that shines out to the side. So there's no lighting that goes out into the back there. Another way that we could reduce the impact for those neighbors and things, along with the trees, greater separation with units, green corridor, lighting that's going to the side, decks to the side. But really, I think we tried to address a lot of concerns and minimize the impact with that. The other thing we did, and this was brought up at the last meeting, is there was a mail box stop right in this area, so that we could afford some more buffer for the home and the residents here at 16 Village Green. We're able to move that in this area now too, since we eliminated those units. So that means there won't be cars stopping right here next to their house. It'll be further into the development. Same thing again, just to try to respect the neighborhood that's there, try to minimize impact, try to keep it as green as possible, and work with the neighbors on it. And I thank them for spending the time with me, with those three neighbors to actually to do that with things. So just a general idea how we got to this concept. I'd like to turn it over to Matt Merva here, who's actually going to talk about this concept in more detail. Good, thank you.
For the record, Matt Merva with Bowler Engineering. We've been working with Tom on some revisions to the plan, as he just mentioned, and I'd like to, if you can just go back one slide to the previous version of the plan. What we've done here to create the open space in the center that we're talking about is relocated the septic field from up here in the upper corner, where you see this green open area, down into this area where these two units were formerly. And that does a lot of things for us. I think it helps to address some of Tetra Tech's comments on the plans, some of the comments we heard at the last hearing in terms of length of force main and access to the dosing chamber and the pump chamber, keeping that in closer proximity to the proposed field. So if you can flip back now, I'm sorry to have you keep jumping around here. But if you look at the newly proposed plan, now we have the septic field underneath the central green open space, and we've put units out here at this end, but we've actually been able to increase the wooded buffer here from what was at this line into here. That's all now wooded, where it wouldn't have been before with the septic field out there now. So again, instead of having a force main from our pump chamber here all the way up to a leaching field here, that distance is greatly diminished, and it's right here in this location. One of the other comments that we heard at the last hearing, and was also in Tetra Tech's letter, was to take the pump chamber out of the roadway and move it into open space, which is in the location that you see there, with a little bit of a pull-off for any kind of vehicle that's coming to service that area, so that access is still maintained along that roadway edge. So being able to create this central open space does a lot of things for us. It does give us a home for that mail kiosk, which creates kind of a community element in the middle of the project, which will be nice. It also makes it so that none of the proposed buildings are looking back onto another building. Every building is looking back to open space, essentially, either to a wooded buffer or to a lawn area behind it. So same number of units, but the configuration, I think, lends itself to better views and sort of a better sense of community within the bounds of the project there. So all the units now have more private backyards. We've provided additional screening, as Tom already mentioned. And again, that buffer to the west just got bigger by way of relocating that septic system. A few of the other items we just wanted to touch on that, in response to comment letters and discussions at the last hearing, we have created a boulevarded entry off Village Green Street for greater access. So we have two 15-foot lanes, and we've looked at increasing the turning radii so that a 42-foot truck minimum could maneuver in and throughout the site. So those modifications will be in the next plan set as we get some feedback from you tonight. Before we did hard engineering on these items, we really wanted to get a sense that we're heading in the right direction here in the way we're responding to both our neighbors and to the board's concerns. One thing to note is that we did have witnessed testing done for this area where we're looking to relocate the septic field, and it had a good perk rate of between 2 and 7 minutes per inch, which is about what we were getting on the area up here. So we need to put more detail into the design, obviously, but we're starting in the right place, and we're comfortable that we're going to be able to fit the proposed system in that zone that we have dashed in this rectangle here with the requisite reserve areas as well, all within this common open space. We were asked to show the abutting homes for greater context, and I think Tom has pointed those out. But as you can see, we've provided now 70 feet in between the homes located along this edge, which creates kind of view corridors through and really into the open space of our property internally. We've also had a water system assessment prepared by the town's consultant, which has proven out that the system can provide acceptable pressures and fire flows. So that's, all of the analysis that we're seeing coming back is proving out that the system as designed will in fact support what we're trying to do here. We've been asked to provide some additional information, which we do fully intend to do. If you've looked at Tetra Tech's response letter that just came in today responding to this plan, they feel pretty comfortable that the new plan addresses a lot of the comments here. I'm not going to speak for them. They're here, can speak on their own behalf, but there is more work to do on our end to bring the engineering up to a level that you would be reviewing further and Tetra Tech would be reviewing further. So the next plan set would incorporate the bulk of Tetra Tech's comments from their last letter and some of the things that you see on this new plan. But before we got into the hard engineering, as I said, we really just wanted to get some feedback before we move forward. So when we do come back with these revised materials, assuming we have some favorable feedback tonight, we provide additional information related to the watershed and the stormwater and surrounding topo that we discussed at the last meeting. That will get incorporated into the next round of engineering that we'll do on this plan. We would obviously need to revise the stormwater drainage system and calculations as we get into more detailed grading design. And then septic system design information will be brought to a level that can be reviewed here before ultimately getting reviewed by the Board of Health in the more detailed design further down the road. We'd include a cross-section of the proposed road as was requested of us. We were going to provide curbing to help distinguish the edge of the roadway from the abutting walkways and parking areas. And we'll provide additional information on external light fixtures on the buildings that we discussed last time. And then address the remaining peer review comments. But that's really our ask tonight, is to try to get some feedback on this plan as we move ahead into making the requested revisions. Tom, anything I missed in there that you wanted to cover right now?
I think you covered pretty much everything.
Questions from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of questions. What's the width of the road system inside?
I believe it's 22 feet for the system.
Okay. And driveway lengths, on the north side of the project, the homes that you spread out, what are the length of those driveways?
I believe we have 19 feet of paved area from the garage face to the roadway. And we talked at the last meeting, I think, about just bringing the right-of-way down closer to the road so that there's a greater dimension of sort of private space outside of that roadway for that driveway to occur.
Say that again, please?
So there's 19 feet
Right.
of driveway, essentially between the edge of road and the garage.
Okay.
Are you just talking about that upper area?
That's our minimum, yeah.
Because I mean, at least from the plans, it looks like there's quite a bit more when you go down into the lower
There are
areas.
some with more, but that's the smallest.
19's the minimum.
Yeah.
But what happened if you increase that to 23 feet? What's that do to the I'm just asking the question, thinking out loud. What happens to the project if you increase that road system by a foot?
The width of the roadway?
If I can speak for that.
Sure, Tom.
We have not taken this design to that level yet. Probably what would happen is that we'd actually shift the right-of-way of the layout of the road over a little bit more to get that 23 feet or get a 22-foot width, length of the driveway, so that it'd be a little shifting with that to do. We'd have to play with it. I can't guarantee we could get that right now, but it's probably very likely we could.
But are you asking about a 23-foot cross-section of the roadway or a 23-foot driveway length?
No, not the driveway, the
roadway.
The roadway itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, about the driveway.
So to go from 22 to 23, essentially,
Yeah.
around that loop.
And you're gonna have a Cape Cod berm going around or granite on this
Could be
Cape Cod, except for the culverts and things?
Correct.
Okay.
The reason I'm asking the question is with hindsight, I know it's 2020, but looking at what we did at 106, 108, I believe I want to confirm this, but I believe it's 22 feet there. And it seems just a personal opinion, it seems tight. I'd like to look into that, what we did. Bill, do you remember what the road width was in 106, 108?
I don't off the top of my head, but I know we've had this discussion on a lot of these projects. I think on-street parking comes into it as well, and the ability of emergency and even delivery vehicles, if you have parking on the street, to get by the parking. I know we've talked about a 24-foot roadway in some cases, but I don't remember what
Yeah.
108 Main Street was.
Because
Our bylaw for subdivisions is 24.
24, right, yeah.
Okay.
I-
Look into that, Tom.
To that end, we have provided pull-off areas and parking areas that are outside of that 22 feet, for that sort of overflow parking along those roadway edges where necessary, so that those cars are not encroaching into the drivable 22-foot width.
I do want to talk about this a little bit more.
Yes.
Maybe not tonight, but I don't want it to just die.
An increase in the size of the width of the roadway. Okay. Matt, I noticed you put the mailbox area right in the middle between the two parking areas. Would it make more sense to move it closer to one of them? Because the human nature would be you park right outside the mailbox area, and now you're blocking part of the roadway, whereas if you move it down further to either side, you get it
think that
closer to
makes
one of your
sense.
pull-offs.
I think we just have to keep it off the leach field, but I think we
Right.
can make
Maybe,
that work.
maybe find a way to move it closer to one of those pull-off areas so people aren't
Mhm.
just stopping right on the
So there's some
road.
convenience parking right in front of it, essentially.
Yep.
Is, am I missing, in terms of excess parking, visitor parking? Is there any proposed here? I see a couple of the pullouts that you talked about on the roadway, the northern roadway and the eastern roadway. Is that what you are
That's what I'm
including?
referring to, yeah. Those are parallel parking spaces, basically adjacent to the roadway right-of-way. So we have them here,
Mm-hmm.
here, 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 and then this one is for the service vehicle for the pump chamber.
Do you know how many spaces, given
We
the,
counted that up last time. Let me check my notes when I sit down, and I'll get right back to you.
How wide are those spaces? They don't look very wide.
I think we had 8 feet for those.
And how many spaces does each house have?
Each house has 2.
One outdoor, one indoor?
That's right.
Actually, they're all two-car garages now, so they have 2 indoor and 2 outdoor. I'm only counting the outdoor.
Well, there's 2 units per building, though, right?
2 units per building, and each unit has a two-car garage.
Oh, each unit has a 2-car?
Oh.
Okay. So each unit has a 2-car garage, and outside they have a driveway for 1 car?
2-car.
2 cars? 2-car wide?
2-car wide driveway, 2-car garage. But actually, each unit technically has 4 spaces if you want to count the inside spaces as well. And each building would have 8 spaces.
Needs to be 8 spaces. Yeah.
And how wide are those driveways? Do you have the dimensions?
The garages, I believe, are 20 or 22 feet wide, so the driveway would be that same width.
Same width?
so Tom, the units that you have labeled B, okay, unlike the original plans, now all have 2-car garages.
And so do the A units, correct?
I'm sorry?
The A units?
Yes, they do too.
Yeah.
And all of the B units 2-story?
And there's still about 1,700 square feet of living space, the Bs,
Approximately.
approximately.
Yes.
And the As are a little bit smaller, about 1,500, is that right still, or do they get larger?
They're approximately about 1,600, so I can get you the definitive number on this.
Matt, I know it's, I'm going to probably bring it up again. You know, and it's a, it seems to go along with the type of housing we're seeing built. And today I tried to do some driving around to look at some different developments in Franklin, Holliston, Norfolk. And I guess the lower section where we have all the B units, when you drive to these different communities, you feel like you're going down, it's almost like row housing. You know, and I noticed it on 106, 108, when you go in there, it's just boom, 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 boom. Cook's Crossing over in Franklin, they're all just lined up. And because there's no real trees, because it's gonna be clear cut, it just, it doesn't give it that feel of a more rural or a country setting that we're sort of become used to. And I said, we've sort of looked at 40Bs and say, oh, well, that's the way a 40B is done. But I said, maybe as we all become smarter with 40Bs and we start to see more of them crop up in some of these towns doing it, is there any way to sort of remove that, you know, lineup of houses? It just, if you look at 106, 108 here on Main Street, it really shows. Cook's Farm, I don't know if you're familiar with it over in Franklin. They just line up and they all look at a center or they look at each other. Is there anything we can do to either stagger or reduce that row house type look? And I know it's difficult, but I said to just say, well, that's the way 40Bs are. I think we've got to start to become smarter. And so there's got to be a better way to keep it looking like a community and like a residential area without having, you know, one on top of the other almost, in a lineup.
Yeah. And understand what you're saying. I think one of the benefits to this plan is really, and when you see it, you're like, well, why didn't you do that in the first place? These 2 units right here, having those gone, I think helps a lot, because there aren't units that look back directly on each other. The streetscape, I think along this edge, you know, those are further apart now. These are all 70 feet apart. And around here, you know, we've got the bend in the road, so you're not looking directly down the entire street. And then we are providing street trees and the post lights along that street edge to try to give that some character. So we're, you know, it's a dense project, but we're mitigating the density, one, by, you know, preserving a lot of wooded area and the buffers, providing streetscape internally, providing open space internally, but the housing type and the neighborhood type, the look and feel of having this kind of tight-knit community, I think is sort of reinforced by that streetscape of, you know, a walkable street that you would want to walk down, and there's a rhythm to it. And we've got a tree and a light post basically at every, you know, between every driveway. So I think those are the things we're trying to do to mitigate that. I understand what you're saying, but hopefully increasing the amount of internal open space that you see here now is going to help with the character of that neighborhood.
And I'm just thinking out loud, if we took the lower row of houses and moved them back a hair and added another 5-foot landscape island, is that a possible, or am I really?
Move them back this.
In other words,
this
move them
way?
more, I know we're not right at the edge, move them back a little further, and then did some kind of strip in between those rows to sort of give them some privacy, is that possible, or is it?
Very tight to the resource area
Right.
buffers, and that's, we've kind of pushed, we have, what you don't see on this plan is the associated grading that goes with those homes, and we have low areas where we have to capture stormwater before it runs off directly into those, so you see some space here, but when you look on the grading plan, this, you know, there's actually a stormwater management feature there, which won't allow us to push that back any further.
Just a quick question. You may have answered this question before, but there's so many projects, I honestly can't remember. Is this a condominium? If it's not a condominium, what is it that the grantees are going to get? How much land? You know, how is this going to be set up?
Sure. God, Mr. Smolak can probably answer that best.
I mean, obviously, there are a couple ways you can go with this, but we're looking at a homeowners association. And as opposed to a condominium, we think it provides us a little more flexibility.
So would there be common areas? You know, in other words, these are all duplexes, correct? And so,
Yes.
and so, if these were, you know, individual houses, what does a purchaser actually get? Do they get the land around their side of, you know, is there, around their side of their unit, and is there sort of a dividing line, and how do you divide the driveways? Things like that. I'm just curious as to how that's going to be managed.
Actually, the duplex units would be, they're actually directly on a 0 lot line, so that you know that the lot line actually bisects the units, and on each side of it, they'd have setbacks to each side yard lot line. So actually, each unit would sit on its own lot.
Okay.
With a 0 lot line. And then there'd be a homeowners association with deeded rights to actually common areas within the development.
Okay.
No different from a subdivision, conventional subdivision.
Okay.
Dan?
A question.
Go ahead, Joe.
Matt, one more question. I know you went over the road details, the sidewalk details. Are the sidewalks on both sides, or?
No, they are not. Can you flip back to the other plan? Yeah. So the sidewalks are essentially on the inner loop here, and that would be the same on the new plan, and then they connect out to Village Green Drive on the left side as you're exiting.
Sidewalk all the way to Village Green?
Correct.
Right. Thank you.
That was next. That one was, I'm sorry. Two Village.
Yes, that's what I was asking. Can you blow that up, Amy, one?
And I'm only showing the old plan just because it shows more detail on.
Here we go, now I can see it.
the walkways.
Yep.
Other questions from the board?
Uh,
Go ahead.
I have a question for Matt. I had submitted that letter to the chairman. I'm not sure if that was forwarded to the applicant or not. Some of my concerns in the letter had to do with ADA compliance, and I understand that the mailbox has been moved away from Village Green Street. But when that letter gets around to being answered, does the sidewalk to Village Green Street still have to be ADA compliant?
From, so this section you're talking about?
Yeah. So coming down and up to Village.
That I'd have to look into. I think if we're providing an accessible route from someone's home to their parking space, and there are accessible points like to park next to the common area or to be near the, if you can accessibly get to the features that we have on site, I think that's what we need to provide. I'm not sure that we need to provide an ADA accessible route out to Village Green Street, particularly if there's not a accessible route to tie into out there.
Okay.
I think we did circulate that memo, Kevin, but I think it's actually going to probably, a lot of those questions are going to be answered with the new plan based on this drawing, because we've removed a couple of houses. and things, so-
I think a lot of the comments might not even apply anymore.
Right, correct.
With the new configuration.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dan?
Is there a community building or any kind of,
There's nothing proposed in the community zone.
okay, is that something that was a deliberate decision, or, I mean, I see a lot of those in projects like this for seniors. I typically see a clubhouse type structure where people can have meetings and play cards, and it just, I mean, this is a little community, and it's active seniors, so you sort of expect there to be somewhere where people can get together and congregate.
Yeah, a community clubhouse can actually be an expensive proposition to any type of condominium, any type of homeowners association. We've actually constructed clubhouses in communities, and generally what the magic number is, you try to have at least 250 units to support a clubhouse, just to actually, to heat it, to keep it maintained and everything else with it. And it actually takes that many people to really actively use it. Right in town here, we have development we did with 140 units of age restricted. There's a clubhouse there, and I would say probably 75% of the time you drive by, there's maybe one car in the parking lot for it. They use it, yes, they have some meetings at night, things like that, and poker games and other things, and it's different parties, but it really takes a critical mass to support a clubhouse, and we just don't have it here with the 56 units.
Okay. At the last meeting that we had, I think it was actually in February, late February, and then I circulated a memo on March 1st, and one of the issues that I mentioned in the memo was the need to have details on the proposed septic system, so soil logs, test log data, test pit data, elevations, groundwater elevations, and then, just the specs for the septic system. It's kind of like the same questions we were asking for Abbeville. The sooner we get that information, I think, is the better, because to me, the main environmental impact source for this project is probably the septic system, somewhat subordinate the stormwater system, and there is, a down gradient wetland system. So I think, is that something that do you have that information that you can give us, or?
What we're at that point right now is that we actually did very, very preliminary. We know a septic system can fit in that area based on the perks. But we really need some guidance from the board here tonight, whether they like this plan or we should go back to the other plan, because it sort of determines where we design that septic system. We'll go back to the original plan, keep it up top, have more clearing of the rest of the area up there, or should we go more towards this central area with the septic system where it's green, and develop this plan with it? So asking that question, I asked the board, you know, if we could get some type of recommendation on which way we should go with this. I mean, I think this plan is far superior and far nicer with that, but just before we go to that level of detail, and actually, your review that you had done was very thorough with everything. Same thing, we didn't get to that because there was no sense of doing that review on a wrong plan that the board may not like. So if we have that guidance, we can answer those other questions and take it to that engineering level.
All right, so do you have the test pit data, the groundwater elevations for the leaching field? Is that something that,
We had multiple tests witnessed by the Board of Health, actually
Okay.
about a week and a half ago. The perk test ranged from 2 minutes to 7 minutes per inch. The groundwater was very low. It was very conducive to a septic system. The blocks that you see, confident that we could design a septic system that would fit into that blocks right there. But to give you all the details and everything, we don't have that here tonight. The layout, what type of septic system it is, whether it's trenches or galleys, and also some of the other information that would actually impact grading and things like that as well. So,
how deep is the groundwater? Do you know?
in that area, it's pretty significant. Did they even hit groundwater? How about that one?
I was down, I can average just 16 to 18 feet.
16 to 18 feet in that area, no groundwater.
And is it your plan to, I mean, the topography drops off quite a bit from like 216, it looks like, down maybe what, 10 or 12 feet or more towards the wetland. Are you planning on filling that, or what is your cut and fill plan on the site?
Actually, the
Right.
original plan had about a 14,000 foot fill, a 14,000 cubic yard fill, okay? The back of all B going towards the wetland, we were proposing to have all walkout basements. So that it actually, the building follows the topography of the ground.
So the closest row of houses to the wetland will not be
Correct.
filled,
That's correct.
but you are gonna fill up to that point?
There'll be areas of fill, there'll be some areas of leveling and cut. Overall, the site is a fill with that, but it slopes, and Matt can probably explain this better, but if you look where the ranches are and it's sloping down towards the wetland, the whole site does slope gradually down that area.
Yeah.
And we have to create level plateaus for the houses to sit on.
Okay. I'm just wondering, I mean, to the chair's point about taking advantage of the natural environment, the topography, and try to mix things up a little bit rather than seeing a linear roadway system, is there a way to kind of step down perhaps these roads so that it's not just one flat site?
Oh, yes. So this road is higher than this road. The grade starts to drop, and then these units are lower than these.
Okay.
So we are following the slope, generally speaking, but I think what Tom's speaking to is that there are areas where we have to level out. Like this will be a level area, and then there'll be a slope down here to these lower level units. These doors will be basically at the same elevation as the doors across the street, but then we continue to slope with the topography from there down. So it is stepping down.
Okay.
But the houses on the lower streets will be at the same eye level, basically.
These
Yeah.
essentially
Yeah.
are at eye level with each
Yeah.
other. But there's a grade change behind these units, so that this is kind of a plateau that relates more to the elevation at A center there.
Okay. The water system review that you guys submitted on April 13th, this is something that you commissioned or the town commissioned?
The town commission, that's the DPW superior consultant. for the
And do you agree with this? Do you have any?
We agree with it.
All right. What about the internal roadway radii? Is there any issues with fire trucks? Has that been reviewed by the fire chief or the fire department?
We put together a new turning radius template on this updated plan, and we've worked out with the large truck and even larger delivery vehicles, 42-foot truck, can get in here. We did make some tweaks to the kind of the nose of this area here and increase the radii into the property here a little bit, but for the most part, the system worked as it was. It was really just this area and some tweaks to the corners. So those new radii will be reflected in the updated plan set that we put together here.
Okay.
We usually get a letter from both the chief of police and the fire department
Yeah.
after they review, right?
Yeah.
Right.
We should
We don't
get
have
one.
it yet, though.
We will.
Okay.
Again, once I think they do the new engineering plans,
Sure.
we'll be
Yeah.
requesting that letter.
Oh, and just on the septic issues again, I'm assuming then all the septic systems that are below the septic, all the individual septic tanks that are below the leaching field, is that gonna have to be pumped up?
Yes, there will be, you have everything flowing by gravity to the one septic tank, and from that septic tank to a pump chamber that will take it to the field.
Where-
Much less in distance, so that it was when it was pumping all the way.
Oh, so each unit will be flowing to a central tank?
Yeah, everything, gravity flows basically down to this
To this.
location.
Oh, there it is,
and then
okay.
pumps
Oh, I got it.
the force main up into the leach field.
And what's powering that pump? Electric? And what happens when there's a power outage for a week?
It will have its own service, and it'll have backup generator. That's all part of Title V.
There's a backup generator in that pump station?
We have not got that level of detail yet, but it will be in its own facility, whether it's a small building or an underground tank or something, it will be located.
That's something that flips on automatically, it's not something that someone has to go and,
That is correct.
okay. That's all I have.
Mr. Chairman, I think Tom and his team are looking for some feedback from us tonight, and again, I want to go back to the road system. This is our fifth 40B project in town, I think the sixth for me personally. So as we do these, I think the bad news is we've got a lot of 40Bs. The good news is we're learning a lot from each one we do. I'm not comfortable with, this is me talking, I'm not comfortable with 22. I think we should be looking at 24. And I think another issue we should be looking at and talking about is the density. I think we have to find a way to get to a better place in terms of the density of this project. And so I'm throwing this out there now so that, to give you some feedback, and as we start looking at engineering and talking with the fire chiefs and the safety issues involved, I think that's a direction that we might want to be going in, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of leap on that if I could, because as I look at this project, and I happen to believe that the River's Edge project was a terrific project, and I'm kind of proud to have that in Norfolk, and certainly it fills a tremendous need. And I think that an age-restricted 40B also is an important add to this town. But at the same time, if you're going to River's Edge, it's really pleasing to the eye, the way it's all mixed around, okay? And it's kind of, even though it's new and the trees are not mature, it's in keeping with the rural feel of Norfolk. And again, you did a terrific job there. I think it's just a little too dense. And I understand that there's 56 units, which is 23 buildings, right?
28 buildings.
28 buildings, yeah. And I understand that with the affordable component of that, that there's, there's a trade-off to be made. But I personally would feel more comfortable if you could eliminate a couple of buildings from your plan. I'm not an engineer and architect, so I don't know where that would be, but I think if you could, you crushed in 2 more buildings down in the lower level to accommodate for the building that you took out of the green space, and I think adding that green space was terrific. But I would like to see it a little less dense, a little more room between the units, especially now those B units along the bottom roadway. And I would just say that I would encourage you to look to see if there's a way that you could eliminate a couple of buildings, and add a little bit more green space. And I think that would make the whole development more desirable to your buyers, because many of your buyers are coming from, 25, 3,000 square foot homes, they're downsizing, but if they're living in Norfolk, they're coming from 30,000 square feet or above land areas. And so that's just my opinion, and I just want to share it.
So it may not necessarily be the amount of units, it's actually how they're situated. And I guess from what I'm hearing is you don't particularly like the houses lined up with the street. If you go to the Village of River's Edge, there's actually basically the same amount of separation between those units and these units that are proposed here, when you actually measure them. There's some of those that are down, I think as low as 14, 15 feet apart, similar to what's proposed here with things. I guess what I'm hearing is actually, if there's a way that we could twist or turn them potentially and offer a little bit more character with that, that's something that, it seems like you're gearing more towards that a little bit. I mean, there are some things that we could do. I mean, we could actually eliminate some of the ranches, the smaller footprints that are two-story buildings. Actually, yes, we did put more down in that area, but they take up less area than the ranches, so there's sort of an equal trade-off. I mean, we could actually, up where the A units are on the northerly edge, I really wouldn't want to do this after all the work with the neighbors, but we could put two-story units up there and put a couple of units back and still have a buffer that they can look through with everything and create more space in between them. Where the septic system was up in the western corner up there, we do have additional land up there that we could actually move a couple of units in and twist and turn and things like that. We could create, or try to create, something that maybe has a little bit more twist and things like that to it. But I have to say that in the age-restricted development like Village at River's Edge, a lot of people that move in do appreciate a driveway that's straight in and straight out and maybe doesn't have a twist or turn or turn around to it or something like that and things to get into it. So that's just a thought process with that and things as well. But I mean, we'll look at it and things and maybe try to twist or turn or add some character and things like that. Pro forma wise, what we're trying to come with, it is tight, and I know there's some other discussion items that we haven't hit upon tonight. There may be some work that needs to be done on Village Green Street and things like that increase some costs and things as well. So we have to look at everything. It's just, we can't just say we can eliminate units without actually going through the pro forma and looking at how the budget is and everything with that. Our first attempt will actually be, if the board does like this plan, is to maybe try to tweak some of the houses, move around, create some different buffers in between them, and maybe try to give it a little bit more of a with that, if that's something we can try first.
In our housing to date, or especially our 40B housing, it works out that there's calculations when they looked at 106, 108, the adding of 84, was about 4 units per acre. And I think this development is about 12 acres, the actual footprint of this. It's 30 acres in total, but I think the footprint of the development is 12 acres. So, and I think it's in the book here, it shows that 12.8 acres is the footprint of the development.
The disturbance, but we could
Yeah.
increase that pretty easily.
Yeah,
if we wanted to.
but I mean, so that would speak to 48 units. So you think on that lines too, you're at 56. And no one says 48 is the right number. We might have been wrong with 4 per acre too. Maybe we wanted less. But to give you a range between 48 and 56, based on what we've been doing in the past, how we're looking at development in Norfolk as a guideline.
Mr. Chairman, just,
Yes, Bill.
we're gonna be doing an architectural review. Typically, that's been done towards the end of these projects. And a lot of these issues that you're talking about, the layout of the buildings, the location, come out in that review. Maybe we wanna start to review that a little bit earlier.
I think it would be important, because we don't want them to go through the engineering, and then, I think we did this at, I think it was at 106, and also at 25 Rockwood. We waited till the very end, and then it was a big shock and surprise. And so we don't want to do that again. So I think that's a good point, Bill, that maybe we want to start having Glenn work with Tommy's people.
But I think the issue is more than the architecture of the buildings. I think it's really the
It's the
site
layout,
design.
right,
It's the
the
site
site
design.
layout.
And my impression of this is that, and I don't mean any offense, but this feels like this is the layout that maximizes the number of units. And in the way that the road is designed and in the houses put on the plan, and the leaching field put in the plan, this just feels like this is the plan that gets you the most houses, rather than here's my tablet, I'm gonna create an interesting community, be damned about the number of units. I want to create something that really is something that reflects the community of Norfolk, and something where these houses have privacy, it's not linear, it takes advantage of natural topography. You know, we've all seen those projects. I mean, they're typically the market rate projects, and that it's different, it's not 40B, but, I live in Wayland, I drive through similar age-restricted projects in Weston and Sudbury, and they're different. They have a different feel, different layouts, and I think that with some imagination, this could be morphed into something that I think is a better design, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a reduction in density. I think that's something that you can come back to us with, something that, might still have 50 units or 48 units. I think it's more just the layout that feels like this is a very linear design without a lot of privacy, and you're right up against that 25-foot setback, and I understand it complies, but the zoning doesn't allow this level of density. So I think if the drafters of the zoning bylaw thought that we were going to have this number of units on a parcel of land, they probably would have required a larger setback of rear yard and side yard. So just my impressions.
And as I mentioned, Tom, and I think the board, most of the people, if they turn it a little bit, we approved Cleveland Street. But if you remember, this looks very similar to Cleveland Street, so I think it talks to what Dan said about maximizing the number of units. And we particularly didn't like that project's design. It dropped off on the one side, similar to this is going to drop off on the one side. It had the larger units on the upper side where they had some ledge. And it was not a particularly appealing design. And I think that's where a lot of us are coming from, is we've gotten smarter. We've learned a little bit from that, so we're starting to look and say, can we mix it up? And I think Dan's right. It doesn't mean a lower density, it means just mixing it up a little bit so that it gives you a little more privacy, a little more feeling like Norfolk, maybe a little bit like River's Edge in some respects. I sort of tried to look at some of the buildings. You got a little bit kitty corner there. Some you have pushed back a little further. I think you have a ranch style at River's Edge as well, don't you? Is that considered a ranch style, that ones that are set back on the upper section?
Ranch, there are some two-story units.
Yeah, okay.
I think we did ask for a unit reduction on Cleveland Street.
We did. Actually, yeah.
Yeah, we did, and that did, that
42 to
improved
34.
the,
Was it 42 to 34?
Cleveland Street,
Cleveland Street. yeah.
Cleveland Street, we went to 32 from 40.
40.
And we went from 48 to 40 at 106, 108.
Right.
I'm not sure what you guys can come up with, but I don't know how you're going to convince me that 56 units is going to work in here with a 22-foot road. Again, that's where I'm coming from, and I'd like to see what you guys can come up with.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to say to Tom, me personally, I appreciate you talking to the abutters. I think trying to maybe not come to a perfect resolution on every issue is not, might not be possible, but I think it's nice trying to work with them and trying to find a resolution. I personally think that it sounds like a good idea to have the ranch one-story homes near the abutters, and as I think the applicants stated, the topography is naturally sloping down, so as you're dropping off, those two-story homes in the rear become less offensive if you're looking into the development from the street. The street being up towards Village Green Street and the abutters.
Good. Yeah, I know Sean Reardon, who couldn't be here from Tetra Tech, I think in his letter he does also state that he appreciates the amount of effort in trying to work with the public, work with the abutters and the ZBA, and trying to get a better development, and that is evolving properly in the way it should. So I think that's noted as well. Before we get to the traffic, I'd like to hear from the public. Is there any comments with regard to the layout? Please state your name, and could you grab a microphone?
This will be quick. My name is Brad Walker. I'm at 16 Village Green. I just want to echo what you said. I live right next to this road here in the corner, and this is a significant improvement with less houses behind me, and also moving the mailbox and not having the traffic back up means that we're going to feel like we have more privacy without cars, stopping right next to our yard almost. So I just want to thank Tom for working with me and some of the other neighbors, and like I said, just echo what you said, and that the ranch is a big deal, to be able to go out in our backyard and not be looking up, at houses, because we actually drop down, like on my property, like I almost feel like I'm in a bowl. So I definitely would be feeling like I'm looking up, especially if it was 2 stories. And so this is a big improvement, more than I had even expected. So thank you, and thank Norfolk Holdings for that too.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Probably don't need this, I can talk very loud, but good evening. Jennifer Putt, I'm at 27 Village Green. And my question is I understand that the way this design is laid out, you have one way in and one way out. Has there been, or what was the discussion in terms of access on the southern side of the property? And if not a roadway, a walkway to maybe connect to some of the streets on the other side?
Tom, do you want to take a?
And I don't even know if that's possible, because I know there's some woods and wetland and stuff. Thank you.
When you say the southern side, you mean Stanhope? Is that what you're?
No, what I'm talking
You
about
need-
is actually on the
Juniper.
behind B.
Juniper, correct?
Yes.
Ju-
Juniper and
which-
Bigelow and that
Yes.
neighborhood to the back.
Comes in across from the,
Actually, I believe you're talking down in this area here,
Correct.
and there's some extensive wetlands that separate. There's an upland area on the other side as you get closer to Juniper, but there's some extensive wetlands that you'd have to cross that would be very difficult to put a road through there. A prior developer had tried to do that and met with a lot of opposition with everything at that point in time. A pathway or something, same type of thing. It's maintenance as an intermittent stream and things like that. It could be difficult to actually try to connect through there with that.
Okay. In the back corner.
Thank you. Stephanie Ackley, Boardman Street. I just have a couple questions to touch base on regarding some of the things that we talked about already tonight. With
the mic
regard, it says green means go, right?
You have to yell.
With regard to the 2-story homes that are now seen in this plan, do we have an estimated dimension, I guess footprint, size, height that we would be looking at for those structures yet at this point?
Preliminary we do, I could actually, if you scroll down on the plan. That's actually the units themselves that are proposed. 2-car garages, a little bit different type of look with them. You have front door here that's set back, the other front door is around the side. On that. You can see the layout here. You have family room, kitchen, dining area, stairs going up. The actual door here is on the side, which gives it a nice break so you don't have all the front doors coming in from the street with that. Very attractive look to it. Actually, it's dimensions on that. It's about 70 feet wide.
The total
Is that an
structure?
A, Tom, or a B?
it's a B.
That's a B.
So the B you have is about 84 feet wide by 59 feet long, or vice versa, 84 feet long by 59?
We
That
replaced
was-
that blade.
Okay, you replaced that one?
The new
Okay.
B. Yeah, it's the old B.
Okay.
The new B is actually this right here that was submitted as part of this.
The new B is not the old B?
revised plan. We have 70 feet across, and I think it's 62 feet in depth.
What about the height?
The height, I'm gonna say it approximately in the mid-30 range, probably about 34 feet or so. I can get you that definitive number with that.
Thanks. And I guess to add to that question, this is sort of an opinion, but I think it's a valuable one that typically people that are over 55, maybe looking for ranches in particular, instead of having a 2-story home, having to deal with stairs. So that may be something to consider in the plan.
Be careful, there's a lot of us over 55. I mean, still can make it upstairs.
I know that he's had no problem selling the homes at River's Edge, and those are, a mix between the two and the ranch style, but just kind of a point while we're discussing the actual height and floor plan of the two different style homes. To the chairman's point earlier, talking about, and I know we've kind of bounced around with it as well, the look and feel of the row houses, would adding more trees be a simpler solution to that? To kind of create more separation and sort of varying landscape? Because right now I'm just seeing a lot of the same throughout the whole project.
Can Matt comment?
Do you want to raise the idea of maybe doing a design
There you go.
I think you should. Do you want to bring it up? I meant you more. I don't really think you're going against. It's a different kind of review than what you're going to. What is Mike's thing? I think you'd agree with it. It's okay. I think Mike wants
Wasn't it one of the very first ones?
Yeah, but we're way deep in the back one now.
We can also do a better job of landscaping.
So you're talking about the street trees here?
Yeah.
We're showing basically one between every building. I think we could look at increasing some of the vegetation in there. Maybe there's some clusters of flowering trees you can introduce that provide a little more separation in some places where we can. We'll take a look at that.
Yeah, I just think that it, when you're considering not only driving through the neighborhood, but, if you're purchasing one of these homes, you don't really want to be looking out the window and seeing your neighbor, so to speak. And a lot of the homes in town have a wooded separation between their property as a requirement with their acreage, sort of. So I just think that that's kind of something that maybe could be considered. And then to Mr. Kaluza's point about the street width, will on-street parking be allowed in this development at all? So I feel like that really, when you're allowed on-street parking with a tight road to begin with, you're creating emergency access problems and things like that. So are we restricting on-street parking altogether? And if so, are we accommodating enough of the parallel parking spots for the development, considering the volume of houses that are being built?
I think we have in the past restricted on-street parking in these condominium or these 40B type projects, but Tom, do you want to, for 8 spots per unit is a pretty sizable number. I think that's why there's not as much, quote, visitor parking, which also reduces the...
I'm sorry to interrupt. There are 14 spaces in those parallel parking.
14 spaces?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, but Tom, do you want to talk a little bit to that?
Each building has 8 parking spaces, including the 4 that are in the 2-car garages. 14, as Matt mentioned, in the parking spaces that are around the internal loop there, that's the roadway system. Probably, it's unavoidable. You're going to have holidays, you're going to have Super Bowl parties and things. Traditionally what we've done is basically limit parking to one side of the road. So you always have enough room for cars to pass in those holiday times, or whether it be some type of family get together or something like that.
And would this be a one-way or two-way traffic?
It's two-way traffic.
Thank you.
Could I just ask a quick question too regarding, I'm not trying to design this or anything, but as I look at this plan, it appears as though the southern edge, all the houses on there are all the same. And what I was wondering is, in terms of trying to break up this redundant appearance of, is there any plan to like maybe flip-flop the design? Or, and the other thing I'm thinking about is Cook's Farm, whereas if you look at those houses over there, they're all fundamentally the same footprint, but they have characteristics about them that really distinguish one from the other. And I didn't know if that might be an element that you may incorporate in order to mix it up a little bit and have a slightly different appearance as opposed to this row house thing that we're talking about.
I mean, it's actually preliminary to get to that. I mean, we actually came to the board tonight to get a feel for this plan, and we're getting some good feedback. But yes, I mean, there would be a different elevation and vernacular to the houses. This wouldn't be all the same coming right down with that. And that would be something that would be introduced and discussed as we talk a little bit more with the architectural and the review at that point in time.
And Glenn usually asks about that.
Hmm.
Glenn usually has an input on that.
Right.
Right.
I think Bill's point's correct. Maybe we need to get Glenn to start working a little bit on some of that. Or has he started looking at the plans yet, you know, or of the houses, actually what they're looking like?
He hasn't, because, the plans have changed a little bit, and I know we're talking about architecture, but a lot of the site design layout comes into that review as well. So I think if this is the plan, the general layout plan that the board would like to go forward with, I think would be a good time to bring Glenn in. He generally has some good input on setbacks, locations, mixing up the style of houses, so.
I think what I'm hearing, Mr. Chair, is that there's a desire to see a different layout, and I don't think it really should be the board that does that design. It's you guys. It's you guys going to propose something, and we need to review it. But I'm hearing a sentiment that this is not a preferred layout of buildings and roads. And what other zoning boards have been doing lately, especially with dense projects like this, is bringing on a design review consultant, typically an architect, but looking at a big picture issue of looking at the overall layout, not necessarily the architecture of the buildings, but more just how everything is kind of laid out on the site. And that might be something that could add value to this discussion, and perhaps perhaps we give the applicant a chance to come back with something that looks different, and then have input from a third-party consultant, or we could bring on somebody now that could work with the applicant's team to think about ways to improve this design. So that's an option that's out there. There's a gentleman who does a lot of this work for zoning boards on Chapter 40B. I'm happy to set that up if that's something you want to explore.
Mr. Chairman, I like the second part of Dan's suggestion, where the third party works with Tom's team, rather than Tom going back, designing something else that we don't like. I'd rather have that input now and have them work together now, rather than having them spinning their wheels and then coming back again and we don't like it. I think it makes more sense and is more productive and will save time if it's done the latter part of your suggestion.
And how would we set up? This would be another peer reviewer?
Yeah, it would be a peer review. So it would be just like our other folks, and there'd be a contract with the zoning board. It would come out of the 53G fund. And yeah, obviously the applicant would have to consent to the peer review, but I think it would add a lot of value to this project. And we haven't done that in the past with other projects, and typically you don't do those with small two-family kind of projects, but you typically do this for more urban, denser projects, apartment buildings and so forth. But I think with this, all the concerns I'm hearing tonight just kind of go in the same box of it's the layout, it's the design of the project. So I think that's where the person I have in mind could really, I think, add a lot of value and sort of outside the box thinking in terms of how can we structure this without having an economic impact on the developer, but still have something that fits better with Norfolk.
Tom, your thoughts on that? Or do you want to think it through, or do you want to?
Probably would like to, have a discussion with Sam. Do you have a comment on that, Sam, or?
Sam Ormelstein, I'm the owner of the property.
I think you have to use the microphone.
Yeah.
Sorry. Hi. Finally came from New York. I got a chance to speak, so that's good. Thank you very much. The question is how extensive that gets. If it's just reviewing and giving ideas and throwing each other, but sometimes he can just go, as you said before, this is usually used by bigger projects. And a project like this, how extensive it can get, that's the question. If it's just throwing ideas at each other, I have seriously no problem with that.
That's what it is.
I mean, it's nothing, it's not taking anything away from the architect that Beta provides us with. I think it's again, and I don't know what, you're from New York, so I don't know what they're doing in the 40B, if they're even addressing it, but we're seeing everything's starting to look, it's a 40B, and you're starting to say, oh, I can tell that's a 40B, or I can tell that's an over 55 development. And I think we've got to start to pull away from that. Not everything should just look like a boxed product. And Tom has done some fantastic work in town. River's Edge is one that Don mentioned that, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to see it, that is really does exemplify what we're trying to do in town. So I think that's what we're trying to do is, A, it helps Tom because they'll sell quickly, and B, is it keeps to the character of Norfolk.
As long as it helps the development and it helps the characters, I have no problem with it. As long as it doesn't go into, hey, cut down on units, do this. As long as it's more about character, less about density, I'm all for it.
Yeah, the goal is not to drive down density. The goal is to improve the design. But just to be fair, if the end result is an improvement of the design means you might lose a few units, that might be the residual effect, but that's not the point of it.
Not the goal. Yeah. I mean, Tommy brought up in the northern corner there, you may have room for another unit or two. It may actually benefit.
Yeah. I think probably the best thing to do right now is you do have a consultant that you're familiar with, that work with, or I don't know which way the board would go with that direction, but maybe present this plan to them, have them come back with some type of proposal of what they think, and a cost estimate with that, so we can investigate that and move down that path before the next hearing, and maybe get some feedback and see what we can do to move forward with it.
Okay. You'll set that up?
Yeah, do we have consensus here?
Yeah, it sounds a good idea.
Yes.
So I can,
That was easy.
I can get a price proposal. It'd be nice to get this started before the next meeting, is that?
Yes. Yeah, I think you have to do it quickly.
Is it worth it for us to sit down with whoever you're thinking about working with and just, this is the plan, and the board puts their concerns down?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we get from point A to point B and create a better project for everybody?
I think we can do that in a
Then
workshop
maybe
session.
come up with like an hourly rate, or something
Right.
like that,
Yep.
and not to exceed, or a ballpark idea that puts us in the range of where we're going.
Maybe you can contact him, and we can set up a
Yeah,
working,
we
we
can
can
do
set
that.
up a working session
Absolutely.
with two members, Dan, John, yourself,
Right.
and
Yep, okay.
you can stay up there, Sam, if you want. We'll let you talk all night since you came all the way from New York, you know? Did you come from the city?
From a suburb, close to the city, not too far.
What part?
Rockland County, right over the Tappan Bridge.
Okay.
Suffering?
Next time, would you,
Literally, I live like 2 miles away from Suffering.
I have relatives in Suffering. Yeah.
next time, bring some Linzer tarts, would you, please?
I left my Yankee cap at home. I know
You were smart.
Is there any other comments from the public with regard to the layout of the project? Okay, good. All right. Now what everybody's been waiting for is the traffic engineer, Bill Scully, I think. Go ahead, Bill.
Supposed to be green.
Okay. Thank you. For the record, Bill Scully with Green International Affiliates, to talk about traffic, although I was kind of happy to see it continuing on architectural and other. So anyways, we began the project back last year, so the traffic report that was submitted with the application is dated June 2017. I'm going to try to briefly summarize what was in that report.
And we did have a chance to review the review comments from Beta, and I'll touch upon them. We didn't see anything really major in there. We've submitted to the board the responses, but I know Beta hasn't had a chance really to review. I just gave them sort of a heads up that we were going to be submitting those this week. So,
Ben, sorry, did you get these, Billy? Did these, I know there was I think it was a bit of a time lag. Did you get the April 24th memo, or?
We did.
Okay. Is Jason available? Was he not?
He was supposed to be here, he had a family emergency.
Okay.
So we haven't really had a chance to review it, and I'm probably not the right person to respond to those anyways. But,
I think he has it. He received it, I think.
He does have it,
originally.
right?
yeah, I made sure he had a copy.
Yeah, you'll make
And-
a
and-
written report on that. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
It's okay, that's fine. So, I'm going to, a lot of this material you've heard before, so I'll quickly go through it. I think Tom gave me 20 minutes, but I'm going to try to do it in 5 or 10. So the purpose of the study is to, as usual, to understand the roadways abutting the project and which would serve the bulk of the project. And one of the more important pieces of the traffic study is to estimate what additional traffic could be generated by the development project. And then we determine its access and its impact and analysis of the conditions on the roadway system, looking out into the future, and identify if anything is appropriate in terms of mitigation and/or access changes. Over time, and certainly over the last month or so, I mean, we've seen the comments not only from Beta, but we read through Tetra Tech's comments and in coordination with design teams. So some of the things that I may show, it may not reflect the concept that we've been staring at most of the time tonight, but you know, we are aware of some of the changes on the access road, for example. Next. So the process is a series of data collection, including collecting traffic volumes, reviewing crash data, looking at travel speeds, and measuring the roadway, measuring site distances with respect to the site access. And the next step is really going into traffic forecasting. So once we've set our base, we look out 7 years into the future. We look at what else is happening in terms of background growth or site-specific other projects that have been either approved or in the process and nearby. And then the final step really is analysis of those conditions, and then looking at the access and any potential mitigation. I've added the peer review because that's become a normal part of the process too. Once we've completed, submitted, it gets reviewed, and then we go back and forth a little bit. So the study area, which the map is in the traffic report, but it's essentially okay. So here's, just for orientation, so here's the town center, Rockwood Road, 115, Seekonk Road on the other side, and Cleveland Street running between the two, with Village Green coming off of Cleveland Street, fairly close to Rockwood Road. The blue circles are the intersections that we included in our study area. As traffic from the project hits Rockwood Road or Seekonk, then they disperse further. So those became our critical points of analysis. Obviously, the intersection with Cleveland Street and Village Green is where most of our traffic, it's all coming out on Village Green, and then to reach the local network, we have to enter onto Cleveland Street. So just briefly, so we collected traffic counts back in March 2017. We looked at the daily traffic on Cleveland Street, daily traffic on Village Green near the site access, and then did peak period traffic counts at those intersections in terms of morning peak period, afternoon peak period, and seeing how traffic turns in and out of those streets. Cleveland Street, 2-lane road. It's a connection between, as I said, Rockwood and Seekonk. It's tangent, fairly straight, good visibility near its intersection with Village Green. It's stop controlled at Rockwood Road. Cleveland connects this neighborhood with Rockwood Road, the town center, and Seekonk. We measured about 2,800 vehicles per day on a weekday on Cleveland Street over a 24-hour period. Travel speeds average about 31 to 32 in the area. We were in this zone, call it within the 500 feet or so of Village Green. So in that area, we measured speeds at that. General compliance with posted speeds. Some of the speeds are a little bit higher. About 80% are under 35 miles an hour. The crash history, we looked at data from Mass DOT, 3 years of data at those study intersections, and really no major crash history or safety problems related to crash history. I think over that 3-year period, there was 1 crash reported at Village Green and Cleveland Street. Village Green, 2-lane road again, it's 22 to 26 feet wide, really about 22 feet from Cleveland to the proposed site drive, and then as I'm guessing, as the apparent subdivision expanded into Stanhope in that area, the roadway widened out a bit. The road's very straight and level near the site drive. We measured about 250 vehicles per day on Village Green, and average travel speeds in the 20 to 21 mile per hour range. And again, the crash history is very minimal out there. There is the 90-degree curve, about 500, 600 feet west of our proposed site drive. It doesn't appear to cause a problem, and it appears to have a benefit of it keeps traffic going pretty slow around in the neighborhood. And this is the old concept plan, but 28 duplex homes, 56 dwelling units, age-restricted use, single access to Village Green. You all know that. What I did want to mention with the age-restricted, our analysis really did a little bit more of a conservative approach and not assume it's 100% age-restricted, more just general population. So what that means is it's a little bit higher. We're analyzing a little bit higher traffic numbers. Age-restricted use, you tend to have certainly less traffic going in and out over the course of a day. You do have people who are still working, but you have a good proportion who have stopped working. Obviously less number of people per unit, and in a lot of cases you'll have 1 vehicle per unit as opposed to 2 vehicles per unit. So our analysis assumed a little bit higher. I'll point out a couple things here and there when we go through it. But the forecasts were based on the Institute of Transportation Engineers, their models, and the land use assumption. At that time, it was the 9th edition of the models. Since that time, and since the analysis, the 10th edition has come out. It's changed a little bit. In fact, to some extent, the models for this type of development have lowered if you apply the 10th edition model. Some of that may be attributable to taking some of the old data, the data that's 30, 40 years old, and starting to remove that data from the database. I'm not particularly sure why it is in this land use. But anyways, we've, again, used a conservative approach. We've estimated trip patterns on the current traffic. Most of that, and I have a diagram coming up which you'll see, is most of it is oriented during the peak times. We're predicting, again, between the site to and from the center of town. As I mentioned before, the forecast is for 7 years in the future, and we've assumed background growth as well as approved projects. Approved projects included 84 Cleveland Street, Boyd's Crossing, the Village at Norfolk for some of the specific, as well as a 1% per year annual growth rate. This information was in the traffic report. If you focus at the AM and the PM peak hour, the analysis uses 38 vehicle trips during those peak hours. Morning, most of the trips are exiting the site. Afternoon, most of them are entering. As I mentioned, with the conservative nature, if we were to use strictly these age-restricted uses out of the 10th edition, we'd be at about 20 trips in the morning and 28 trips in the afternoon. So you can see, in total, even the 38 isn't a lot of traffic. Age-restricted assumptions would bring it down a little bit more. And as I mentioned, most of the traffic we've predicted in the peak period would be oriented to and from the center, 65%, 25% going out towards Seekonk, and the remaining either going north on Rockwood or straight across towards onto Tucker. So the analysis looks at increases in traffic operations, the site distance. We did look at some of the site internal road design, and I'll just touch on that as Matt already talked about that as well. Traffic increases pretty small with those numbers, 38 peak hour trips once they split off. A quarter of them over to Seekonk ends up giving you about 9 or 10 vehicle trips over to Seekonk over the course of an hour. It's like one trip every 6 minutes. Most of it going towards Rockwood, so the increase is a little bit greater than that. And again, going back to the age-restricted models, the increases would be smaller. All the analysis, you can go to the next slide too, Amy. So when we run the analysis, we're looking at the ability of traffic to exit the minor street or turn onto the minor street. So they're all unsignalized intersections, stop control on the minor street approach. But through that analysis, it also shows us the capacity or estimated capacity of the major street, and if you have the ability to accept more vehicles, which that has been demonstrated in the analysis, in the report. Most of the intersections are operating at a level service A or B for movements either exiting or entering. Levels of service range from A to F. So A and B and C, relatively short delays. E and F would be relatively high delays or higher delays. And the criteria, the one approach, as we mentioned, the exception up there, is coming on Cleveland Street approach to Rockwood during the peak hours, morning or afternoon. Morning probably worse. The delays are higher. So in the future, we're projecting that movement to be E or F, with or without the project. In the morning, it does drop a bit, about a 5 to 10 second increase in average delay. Without the project, you're pretty close to the criteria at 50 seconds average delay, and then with the project, you go over the 50 seconds. But as I said, the analysis does show the major streets all have capacity to accommodate that additional traffic. Safety, I've mentioned already, no significant crash experience. Site distance criteria at the site drive would be satisfied. We've got about 400 feet on approaching site distance to the drive in both directions. You need about 150 feet. Leaving the driveway there, we've Beta asked for site distance sightline triangle. We have provided that, an illustration of that in our responses to show within that triangle where you'd want to make sure vegetation is out of there or low-lying, signs aren't blocking visibility. As I said, Matt talked about this, so we did a preliminary test of emergency access and emergency vehicles, and the trucks can move around that circle. Okay, peer review, so beta reviewed, we reviewed all the comments. In our opinion, they're relatively minor. Some of the comments are, they do relate to some of the things that have been raised in the past few studies, like should you analyze Saturday conditions, can you provide more backup to the 1% background growth? So we've followed that up with conversations either with Richard McCarthy or MAPC to get some additional information or to make sure that we have used good assumptions. And where there were some things that we had to do, I mentioned the sightline triangles. He wanted us to look at the Cleveland-Rockwood intersection to see is there anything that you can maybe do out there to alleviate or reduce down the delay, the added delay. So in the response, we've looked at some things. We've looked at do the volumes warrant traffic signal? They don't. Can you fit a roundabout at that location? You can't without affecting private property on all four sides. Can you add maybe a right turn lane on Rockwood Road on Cleveland Street to Rockwood? You may be able to, but it really doesn't do much for you. Most of the traffic we counted there, the predominant movement is coming out and taking a left. So we have looked at things and really concluded there really isn't any real feasible action you could do that would reduce the delay or change or get back to level of service E in the morning peak hour. In the afternoon, there's no change in level of service between the no build and the build, and the delays are less than 10 seconds. We tested the age-restricted 10th edition forecast number at the intersection, assuming everything the same with trip distribution and assignment, and we will increase delay, but we increase it to about 5 seconds. So, Jason wants to see, I'd like to see, can the average delay be less than 10 seconds? If we use the age-restricted forecast models, we would be there. And we've looked at all the others we documented, so we've provided that in the response appendix showing, how the roundabout doesn't fit in the signal warrants that aren't satisfied.
Bill, I don't know if you were aware, the town is going to be putting in a traffic light at the intersection of Boardman and Rockwood Road. It's going to be blinking red, blinking yellow, with maybe some feature that allows them to create a red when the buses are going through. Has that at all been looked at, or does that come into play? I know this is much further down, but they are, I think it's going to happen, is they're going to add this traffic light in the center of Boardman and Rockwood Road.
Well, my opinion of it would be if in the morning it turns red to accommodate the buses.
Correct.
Which means everything coming towards Cleveland Street would then be stopped for the most part. So that will, in theory, start to create a few gaps. So it won't hurt, but it is far enough away that it won't take that much time. If they're stopped for 20 seconds and then they start letting, like when the gates go down, you start letting the cars come, it'll pick up. The other thing would be is, if as people find it more difficult to come out onto Cleveland, then they take a right and head to Seekonk or, go around the other way as a potential. If you do but it's not going to be that many, but anyway, so we've prepared that. Jason hasn't seen it or reviewed it, and we'll work with him after he has a chance.
Right.
And I think
Do
that's,
you want to say
that's it.
anything? Are you done, Bill? Okay.
Yes. Yep.
I know we're obviously going to wait for Jason's response, but did you want to add anything to
Yeah,
that?
no, I think we want to wait for Jason and Beta to have a chance to review it. I think our probably largest concern is the Cleveland Street intersection, but I think we want to review the responses.
One thing one final thing that is up on the screen is the physical condition of Village Green. So I think that came up maybe in Tetra Tech's comment to look at it, and I know Tom and I talked about it a little bit. So we know that the pavement surface probably between the site drive and Cleveland at some point is going to need to have some type of treatment, whether it's mill and overlay or some overlay.
And Tom's going to do that for us?
Well, it's, we've had the discussion, so we know that with heavy truck construction, it's not going to get better than it is today. So we have oh, there might be one more slide, Amy. I think. No, go another one. So I mean, we have talked about at the 90-degree bend. Not that it's a major deal, but some advance warning on both approaches to the curve, just to let motorists who aren't really familiar, maybe visitors, so they'll know that there's some caution to slow down going around the curve. And I think, okay, I'm done now.
On that pavement, I know the town this summer is going to pave from Rockwood Road to Holbrook Street. Repave, so that's going to be the road that you're actually going to be using for this development. So you probably should have a discussion with Bob McGee with regard to that. So from Rockwood Road to Holbrook Street is going to be repaved.
So on Cleveland Street.
Yeah. Cleveland Street, I'm sorry. Rockwood Road to Holbrook, Cleveland Street is going to be repaved. They're actually holding off from Holbrook to Seekonk because of the 84 Cleveland Street proposed project. So you probably should have a conversation with Bob McGee on that sooner rather than later. The other thing is...
So what we're talking right here is Village Green itself.
Right where Village Green is.
Just so that we're clear, okay.
Yeah. And the other issue is there going to be has there been talk, and I think you may have alluded to it, Tommy, about a sidewalk from Village Green down to Rockwood Road? There is a sidewalk on Rockwood Road, but there is not one on Village Green or on that small section of Cleveland Street. And I find it funny that, 40B is one of the big proponents of it is that it allows less vehicles because people have better access to commuter rail. Without a sidewalk, it really doesn't give people that opportunity.
So I haven't had this discussion with Tom. I think it's about 400 feet, maybe, between Village Green.
We haven't really looked at that yet, things out there in that area. So.
But the one thing I wanted to say, Jason had raised that as a question, and he said if you are discounting, vehicle traffic from the development because of walkability and walking to the center of the T, then that sidewalk should be considered, that section. We didn't discount anything. We're not assuming right now anyone's walking down to the rail station. It's age restricted, and we were, well, yeah, no, I know, I
do my 4 miles every day.
So I think
1.2 miles from that road to the center of town.
So I guess, like Tom said, where we are right now is we might be able to review and discuss that on the team side. We certainly can walk in street, Village Green. It's very low volume, 20 cars an hour. Our project will have some sidewalk to get you there. So it's something that we can look at.
But, Mr. Chairman, and that was one of the comments from Tetra Tech.
Yes.
Right, because, there was some talk about how they're 19 to 22 feet at some points along Village Green. And of course, I think one of the brothers brought this up last time about their walkability within Village Green with the added traffic. So, a concern there.
And on that, so Bola went out and surveyed, did a more detailed survey along Village Green, and it's pretty much 22 feet. It widens out a little bit at Cleveland. It widens out as you go past our site towards Stanhope, but it's pretty much 22 feet.
Other questions from the board? Dan?
So a couple things stuck out to me, just reading Jason's peer review report. Obviously, we just talked about this connectivity to public transportation, and we had a 40B on Rockwood Road, which was truly within walking distance of the commuter rail. It's probably a 9-iron shot, and, oh, maybe not that, but maybe a 4-iron.
About a 9-iron shot.
But still, that's, that's on a sidewalk. I think the board accepted a level of density on that site because of the trade-offs of it being so close to the train, and having sidewalk access. And that just struck me as something that's really missing here. It's not really within walking distance, and, but yet, even if it was, there's no sidewalks, and so I think that's a pretty big, you don't have to answer that, I just wanted to raise it. And then in terms of the length of the road from, Jason evaluated the length of the road and for purposes of the dead end issue, and I guess under the regulations, the way you'd calculate that, it would come out to 1,480 feet. The town's regulation is 500 feet, maximum dead end length of a road. So this exceeds it considerably, and again, we waived that for Rockwood, and I think in part because it's a walkable site. There's not going to be a lot of cars. I mean, people can walk to town center, they can walk to the train station. Again, you don't have that here, and I also think actually that Village Green is a dead-end road, so I would think that the way you'd measure this truly under the regulations would you'd measure it from Rockwood. Rockwood to Cleveland to Village Green, because basically this is an extension of a dead-end road that is Village Green itself. So I think we should run that by Jason and probably Rich, just to make sure I'm interpreting that right, and it's just so we have the right number.
Yeah, and I think the interpretation that the planning board has used is if there's a single entrance to a development, then that whole road off that single entrance is a dead-end street.
Right.
So.
And I think that's how most towns do it as well.
So you'll see my response that I agree to disagree in that, I mean, the having a loop development, I mean, we've got 500 feet maybe coming in from Village Green, and I don't call the whole loop or half the loop dead end. I mean, you got 500 feet to get in there, and then you can go either way. So in terms of, I'm not saying it's not how the planning board is interpreted or your board, but from my opinion and my background, I would say that's not a dead end situation. I mean, you're bringing something else up with Village Green, so that's.
Well, I think you got to add that length to the total length for purposes of that analysis. For what it's worth, I mean, it's a local concern that's weighed by this board as part of the whole process. So anyway, I just want to raise that point, and we can just discuss it with Jason. And then he had a comment on site distances, so I haven't read your response, it just came in this afternoon, but are you going to provide a site distance plan?
Yeah.
That's
Well,
gonna
we put an illustration together for the sightline triangles.
Okay.
To review.
And I think you did that for the Abbeville project, so it'll be similar to that exercise. And do you actually have the ability to clear what's necessary to clear? Is it on your property or is it on abutting property?
Well, there's a little clip that we may clip a corner. I have to see what Jason says.
Okay.
And how he interprets what we've shown.
All right. And then I had a question on Jason's comment about this issue with the level of service. So obviously it's a big issue. We're going from an E to an F. You're conceding that there's a 13.6 second increase in delay. Jason says, in accordance with Town of Norfolk regulations and Mass DOT guidelines, is there a guideline that speaks to trying to keep increases below 10? Is that what he's referring to, or?
Yeah, and I don't want to speak for Jason, but I think looking in MEPA reviews and looking at ENFs and so forth, that's one of the guidelines. I'm not sure it's a threshold, but it's one of the guidelines.
Okay.
I can't speak to the reference to the Norfolk regulations. I'd have to look that up.
Okay, but keeping things below 10 seconds is a benchmark?
Well, yeah. Sort of, it's not a hard and fast.
It's not a regulation that's written hard and fast,
Right.
but it's a general rule and general guideline that's followed.
And at the same time, they'll ask you maybe to look at some things, and if something isn't feasible, they will also concur, and many locations have no treatment after that, regardless of the 10-second or change in level of service.
And I think that's a big point. I think that's something we want to review in terms of what's been presented in the responses as possible fixes versus what else may be out there as possible fixes.
Okay, so at this point, you're committing to giving us a site distance plan. That'll be forthcoming this week or next week?
Well, we had to, it's in the appendix material it'll go out. It was to go out with the response letter.
Okay.
As a separate attachment, and we had to redact some of the crash reports. Jason had also asked us to verify the DOT data with local crash data, so we got local crash data which did verify it from DOT, but we put that in the attachments as well. So we just had to, it almost went out with like names and addresses, and they can't do that.
Okay. And then in terms of mitigation, are you proposing any mitigation, Tom, at this point for these issues? Is that something that's on the table, or something you're still thinking about, or?
I do have one question to come back. I'm just a little confused. Is that I've heard a couple of times that this, commuter traffic, commuter rail and things, that this site is not walkable to the train, or because of the distance, or it's not walkable to the train because there's no sidewalk.
Well, first of all, it's a mile. So I think for some people it's walkable, for others it's not.
I'm with the chairman on that.
Well, yeah, I mean,
It's not that far.
it depends who you ask. I mean, it's some people it is, some people it's not. And if there's a sidewalk there, it's certainly easier to walk, right?
So,
Yeah, we have people who walk the sidewalks that we do have to
the
train.
The sites that you would consider too far by standards for walking to the train? You know, or is it something that because there's no sidewalk on Cleveland, or that most people don't walk? Or I'm just trying to decipher exactly where we're going with that.
My concern was, I think there should be a continuation of the sidewalk. I think you see it at River's Edge. I mean, there's an area, there's no sidewalk. And it's sort of crazy that we don't continue our sidewalks one to another when we do these developments. So from my standpoint, I just think it's, once you leave Rockwood Road onto Cleveland, there should be a sidewalk there. And where this is a development that will have, hopefully, people who are walking, they can utilize a sidewalk on Cleveland and on Village Green to the new development. So I would like to see that, whether it be you or the town. I think that's something we should definitely consider.
Mr. Chairman?
That was my point. I mean, commuter rail is obviously an advantage. We want everybody to use commuter rail, but I certainly just think I notice there are a lot of elderly people you see actually walking from Village Green, River's Edge, towards the center of town. And I always worry about them because you see them, they're literally walking on the side of the road. And it's a little scary. So I think it's, in this case, where we are doing this development now, it probably doesn't hurt to incorporate a sidewalk if we can.
Mr. Chairman? Chris? In the master plan, town's master plan, the goal was to attach sidewalks with development to close sidewalks that may exist already. So if you're putting in a new subdivision or a new development, the idea is to say, can we make some more linkages? And in the master plan, they're showing those potential linkages. And that would be hopefully areas that would be grabbed with development. These are like opportunities. If that's true, this might be an opportunity. It also addresses the existing pedestrians on the existing road. Their safety is considered when they do this. And we've done this before. We've actually put sidewalks down, let's say Medway Branch, for example, because we had some additional development dollars that came that way or something. So this is what we should be discussing.
Right. Absolutely. Okay.
So we did say we'd
Look
review
into
that.
it.
Yep.
Okay. Good. Any other questions from the board on the traffic?
I got one question. What benefit does a boulevard provide as opposed to just a standard driveway entrance?
Well, you have to widen the cross section out a bit. I think everyone's always concerned if you had a single access. I don't worry about it as much as a lot of people do, but let's say you had a single access and something happened, like a utility pole went down or a tree went down, then you have to get cutters out there to open it back up, but with boulevard type, for one, you're wider, things are set back further, and it's likely that you're not blocked in both directions with the boulevard. So if one side gets blocked, you're able to run traffic on both sides of the median. So, I mean, that's sort of a thought process, besides it dressing up or aesthetics and things like that.
Okay.
And you make each lane on the side, on the median, sides of the median wide enough so that if you had to, under an emergency situation, you could get 2 vehicles through there. Or run, and you'd have, under emergency, you might have police down there anyways controlling one-way flow in and out of there. So, but that's what sometimes the boulevard, the advantage that it gives you for that.
Okay.
Yep.
Any questions from the public with regard to the traffic plan? Sir, go ahead. Could you take the mic and state your name?
My name is Bob Lowndes, Stand Up Drive. I have 2 questions, and maybe I misunderstood what you were saying, but it seems to me that this development will more than double the number of cars that would be coming out of Village Green onto Cleveland. You're saying that because people are elderly, there won't be so many people doing that. With all respect, I just don't believe that. And in fact, if people are still working, they will. So I find that very disturbing, what you're saying. The second question is, in your forecast, did you bother to forecast the number of extra cars that are going to be coming from the Cleveland development?
Thank you. So maybe you misunderstood me.
I did.
So, because I didn't say we're not generating new traffic. So we know everyone from our proposed project has to come out onto Village Green. Village Green, under today's conditions, we saw in the peak hours around 20 cars during the peak hour, and we're projecting somewhere, you know, if you use the numbers I have, it's 38 vehicle trips in the peak hours. If we use the age-restricted model, we'll be down in that 20 to 28. So in any event, we're doubling what is on that section of Village Green. So I don't think I said those words, but I mean that's clear. 84. We did add in the traffic on from 84 Cleveland Street. So we added that in as background growth from their traffic projections, as well as we added traffic from the village at the center and Boyd's Crossing into, those were site-specific, and then added more traffic on top of that, just for things that are beyond the area, but there might be some additional growth. So does that answer? I think those answers, we know there's going to be an increase on Village Green. There can't be anything else, because that's where we come out. And it's going to be probably, instead of the 20 vehicles in the peak hour that you see between our site and Cleveland Street, it'll go to 40, 45 in the peak hours, depending on, depending on the time, depending on the actual makeup of the people who buy the houses over there.
Sure. Could you grab the mic? Sorry. You can stay seated, but you just...
Is there any thought? Sorry, is there any thought being given to putting a stop sign from the exit of this development onto Village Green?
Thank you. So yes, we are recommending stop sign. Our site drive that comes to Village Green will be under stop sign control. And then we've got the visibility. We'll make sure that everyone's got good visibility, entering or leaving, approaching the drive or leaving the drive.
That help?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions from the public with regard to the traffic? Okay. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
All right. Tom, looking at your schedule, what do you, obviously, we're going to, in the next week or so, maybe have a design review workshop. We are probably fast approaching on June here for our next meeting. What's your, do you have your schedule yet, what you're looking at? Right now, we have Abbeville on June 6th. I just don't know if we can get one in before that. We only, the problem we have is,
That's a big gap.
I know, the problem we have is, we should be able to do it here on the boat. We're worried about this, now maybe we could do some here, but we're worried because this is a holiday. I don't know. I mean, we do have the 30th open as well, but we had talked about that briefly with regard to Abbeville, but maybe this one is less critical with regard to the holiday on the 28th.
I think that the biggest hurdle we have here is to come up with a plan that works for everybody. And I'm reluctant to go and invest a lot of engineering and stormwater design and everything like that until we come up with something that everybody's comfortable with. Just talking to Matt here, once we meet and have a workshop session, you know, what do you think, for some type of design?
And then to come back with a plan to present that sort of captures everything that was discussed at that workshop. You know, I would think we could do that by the 30th.
I think it's better to
And just-
schedule meetings.
Just keep that meeting to just that topic.
Okay.
We wouldn't get into stormwater traffic or anything else, but just on that.
Well, maybe we can have a maybe we can follow up on traffic.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe do that and finish up on traffic.
'Cause we
Have
haven't-
Jason present his report and just close that out.
Okay, if we could do that on the 30th, that gives us a week to get a consultant or so, set up something up at the
Right.
following 7-10 days for a work group session, and maybe another follow-up session somewhere around May 15th or 20th or something like that, if need be, and then present it to the board on May 30th, if that works.
Does that work for your schedule?
I'm free.
Does that work for all your people, Tommy?
Yeah.
Okay.
May 30th.
Bill, you could, do you think by the 30th, Bill and Jason could get together and you could probably have Jason here for the May 30th review, and we'll close out sort of the traffic?
Yeah, no, I think that's fine.
Okay, good. All right, so could I
Where
get,
where are we just on? Where are we on the schedule? When do we open this hearing?
Oh, I don't know. 228 is the first hearing.
2:28.
It was 2:28.
Okay.
so,
So we're all right. We're 2 months in. Okay.
yeah. All right. Could I have a motion to continue the public hearing for the Enclave till May 30th at 7 o'clock to discuss a new design plan, follow up on the traffic review?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
And it'll be at room 124 at 7 PM on the 30th. Thank you, John. Could I have a motion to close the zoning board of appeals meeting at 9:15 PM this evening?
I so move.
Second?
Second.
Thank you very much. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for attending.